Washington Post recently had an interview with Nancy Pelosi, and the conversation revolved around her views on Medicare-for-all. Now, she tries to make it seem as though she's supportive of Medicare-for-all, but these statements make it abundantly clear that she's not. She says the following: "I'm agnostic. Show me how you think you can get there." All right, okay. Wow. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you show her how we can get there, because she will give you the exact same question or response. Doesn't matter, she doesn't care about the details. "We all share the value of healthcare for all Americans, quality, affordable healthcare for all Americans. What is the path to that? I think it's the Affordable Care Act, and if that leads to Medicare for all, that may be the path." So she makes one point that I personally agree with. I do not think that it makes sense to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and then start from scratch. I want the Affordable Care Act to be in place. I want the protections that it provides to be in place. But while it's in place, I want to fight for Medicare for all.
Yeah, well, look, let's clarify a bunch of things, because apparently Nancy Pelosi is literally asking for clarification. You are the Speaker of the House, you could ask someone. But anyway, so first of all, there are no progressives who say, before we get Medicare for all, let's just trash Affordable Care Act. No one says that, not one person in the country, okay? So if you passed Medicare for all, would it get rid of the Affordable Care Act? Well, in a sense it would, but that's because everyone's already covered. And you would have better coverage than you have under the Affordable Care Act, so then you wouldn't need it. So it's kind of, oh yeah, so I guess you're against the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, because you're getting better coverage and everyone is getting it. So it's such a weird argument to make. It makes no sense at all.
Well, remember, Hillary Clinton used that argument, or at least tried to mischaracterize what Bernie Sanders' views were during the primaries in 2016. So she kept trying to make it seem like he was calling for the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, but he never asked for that. He never wanted that. He wants a better system, but until we have that better system, he wanted to leave the Affordable Care Act alone.
So look, it's new, so a lot of people don't understand it. So let me just again explain. It's like you have health insurance, and so it would get rid of private insurance too. And so people are like, oh, did you know that? It would get rid of your private insurance. Well, that makes it sound like you would have no insurance. No, you would have insurance that covers everything that's covered now and more, and it doesn't cost anything. Now, it does cost in terms of taxes, but it costs less than what we are currently paying today. You'd have, when I say it doesn't cost anything in that sense, I mean no deductibles, no co-pays, no lifetime caps, no nothing. It's healthcare for everyone. So you don't need your private health insurance, whether it's crappy or it's a good one. It's Medicare for all is still more coverage. It's better insurance. It's better insurance than the private one or the protections that the Affordable Care Act gives you. And by the way, it's not like, well, golly gee, no one could know that unless they just happen to be watching the Young Turks now. Did we get Pelosi free membership? I think we did. So she could do that, or she could read Bernie Sanders' bill in the Senate. But wait, hey, that's the Senate, she's in the House. Or she could read Pramila Jayapal's bill in the House, who is the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the largest caucus under Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic Party. And Jayapal's bill is arguably better than Bernie Sanders' bill. Just read it, or have one of your 28 staffers read it and explain it to you.
Well, part of the problem is she has a staffer who's very much against Medicare for all. This is a staffer who's a firm believer in the Affordable Care Act and keeping it the way it is. And so that's, I think, influencing her to some extent. But what do you think about all this, Aida? Like this debate about what's a better healthcare system for the American people?
You know what, my stepfather's Cuban, so he comes from a communist country where they allegedly have, socialized healthcare. But you know what I think about this stuff is when we start talking about Republicans and Democrats and all the politicians that are living a life of privilege and wealth, it's so easy to just sit around and throw around philosophies about things that have to do with another person's their livelihood, and sometimes my grandmother died of cancer and did not have what she needed so that she could get the proper health care because she couldn't afford it. So Nancy Pelosi gets to talk about being agnostic and what my philosophy is. And that is why you have to be informed about the politicians that you rally behind, because you paid their salaries and you're paying for their health care. Meanwhile, they're not caring about yours. And so that's the thing that irritates me, because then when they start with the right and the left, There's a sector of the left, the progressive people, who really care about human beings and are talking about the things that affect us all, not just a select few. And that's the problem that I have with Democrats, is that when they start talking on behalf of those of us who are not a part of the cool clique, you're talking about our well-being and our livelihood, and it's such a throwaway for you. But for us, it's our survival, and that's what pisses me off about this conversation.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to just add about Pelosi is, for her, the idea of getting rid of the Affordable Care Act or changing the system to something different, like single payer, is personal, because she was one of the lawmakers who really encouraged Obama to move forward with the Affordable Care Act. In 2010, when there was a lot of backlash over the Affordable Care Act, Pelosi was apparently the one behind the scenes who was like encouraging him and pushing him to move forward. So when she talks about her legislative wins, Cenk, you bring that up a lot, that's what she's referring to. She sees the passage of the Affordable Care Act as a giant legislative victory for herself. And so the idea of repealing it, I think, is very personal for her.
Yeah, so that goes to Ida's point. Like, hey, but that's my legacy. I don't care about your legacy. Do people have health care or don't they? An Affordable Care Act is way better than the old system that we had. But there's still millions of Americans that are left uninsured completely. And we're still at the mercy of private insurance companies that keep jacking up our rates. The deductibles have gone up 176% in a recent 6-year window. That is a monstrous amount, and that is why people can't afford it. And then you don't have healthcare when you need it most, and that's unacceptable. So my issue with Pelosi goes further, because she then reinforces Republican talking points. She says, right now it's a $30 trillion price tag. What do people get for that in terms of care? What do they pay for that along the way? Again, read the bills, it tells you exactly. And it's not a $30 trillion price tag. You save more money by going to Medicare-for-all than the current system. So when you say it costs $30 trillion, it makes it sound like it's $30 trillion on top of what we're paying now. And that is literally a Koch brothers talking point. So, and then the Washington Post in their coverage of this, but to be fair, almost all the mainstream media, they so thoroughly believe in the status quo that they find any change to it radical, unacceptable, and a virus to the system. So they say things like this. They have a sentence in here, the writers do. Republicans also have sought to use Medicare-for-all as a cudgel against the Democrats. But it's polling at 70%. What kind of a cudgel is that? But they assume, since everyone in Washington hates it, we're all bathing in healthcare money, whether it's ads on the Washington Post, whether it's donations to Democratic politicians like Nancy Pelosi. Well, obviously, I mean, it's so bad. Medicare-for-all, it would cover people and we wouldn't get money. It's so bad that the Republicans are going to use it as a cudgel against Democrats. They just tried that in the 2018 elections and the Republicans lost 40 seats. But look at the framing. The framing by the Washington Post says, well, obviously Medicare-for-all would hurt Democrats. Preposterous. It just picked up. The fact that they want more health care for Americans helped them pick up 40 seats. And then Nancy Pelosi's framing is the Republican framing. And it's unacceptable. And look, she's never gonna allow for a vote. The staffer they're talking about is Wendell Primus. He's her top healthcare staffer. And he's 100% opposed to Medicare-for-all.
Yes.
And she says, no, he's actually the most progressive staffer in Washington.
It's a joke, I know.
Hilarious.
It is hilarious. I have to mention one other thing she said, because this is the part that really got under my skin, because it shows you that there's a giant disconnect between what Pelosi thinks, or at least pretends to think, and what the American people think. So she says this: a lot of people love having their employer-based insurance, and the Affordable Care Act gave them better benefits. What are you talking about? You think that people like the fact that they're like coerced into working in companies that they might want to leave? They might want to leave and start their own small business, but they can't because health insurance is tied to employment. Health insurance should not be tied to employment, period. There should be more freedom so people can be able to leave a job that they might despise so they can start their own small business that actually spurs economic growth, or maybe go work somewhere else that actually has better pay or a better working environment, whatever it is. People do not like the fact that health insurance is now tied to where they work.
No, that's what I can't abide. And so I've got to say this last thing. It's really important because you're going to see it in a lot of the stories. So Medicare for All polls so well that they have to knock it down because everyone in Washington is opposed to it. So they say yes, but if you ask the poll in this way and you say, well, if you take away private health insurance, would you now be in favor of it? And then it doesn't poll as well. But that is ridiculous. It makes it seem like we would take away your private health insurance and you would get nothing in return. But that's not true. You would get better insurance in return. So what a preposterous, biased way to do a poll. But every reporter reports it like, no, that's it. No, where Medicare for All popular? No way, we can't have it. I'm gonna ask a different poll, and in that poll, I'm gonna say it sucks, and it's gonna take away your insurance. Now see, people don't like it anymore. Yeah, if you frame it that way. And then Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party help the Republicans in that lie. The mainstream media helps Republicans in that lie. Now, if you did that on any other issue, now, for example, the tax cuts already poll really poorly, and just people leave it at that. And so they almost never talk about it because it doesn't perform well, and they're all rich, so they're like, you never hear about the polling on the tax cuts. But if you do, nobody ever says, well, I don't remember the exact number now, but it polls at 40%, 30%, right? But if you ask the poll in a way where you said, now, did you know that the top 1% all got $61,000 a year extra in tax cuts every single year because of the Trump tax plan? Now, how does it poll? My guess is if you framed it that way, it'd poll at about 9%, 7%, 3%, but nobody ever says that. Hey, how can we make this policy of the Republicans look worse? But when it comes to providing healthcare for all Americans, all of the media and the Democratic establishment and all of the Republican Party all get together and go, how do we make it seem like this incredibly popular plan is not quite as popular as people think it is? And they are all honestly in cahoots. It's not a conspiracy.
Yeah, it is. It's a war of the have and the have-nots, and they think of us as peons. And if you don't see that and you don't hear that in that tone and what they're saying, it's not about Republicans and Democrats. It's these people and those people, and it's you're not worthy of what we feel you're. It's so.
Yeah. All I'm saying is they don't get together. Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and the editor of the Washington Post don't get together in a room and go, "Bwahaha, let's come up with a plan." But it's the invisible hand of the market. They're all getting greased by these same companies, and it is to their financial benefit to make sure that you don't get healthcare coverage. So that is the stark reality of the matter. So Nancy Pelosi, you are not a progressive, and any media that keeps reporting her as a progressive is being completely dishonest with you. Two easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber, and second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.